Hello, I'm Peter Anthony Holder. This is number 0700, the Stuph File Program with, Peter Anthony Holder. And it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuph File Program, number 0700. And coming up on this edition of the Stuph File Program, you'll meet Melisa Schonfield, author of Bitter or Better, the Melisa Schonfield Story, which chronicles the story of how she spent 3 years in jail for trying to hire a hitman to kill the abusive boyfriend of her daughter and the father of her grandson.
It didn't start out as a book. I was terrified of dying in prison, that something was going to happen. So I wanted my family to have a report of what was going on. So I kept a daily journal and sent the journal home each day. Some days there were several letters that went home. I felt that in keeping my family safe, at the time I was 57 years old, I'd had a great life, and I decided if it meant keeping my daughter and my grandson safe when the authorities wouldn't protect them, I was willing to do what I had to do.
Chelsea Banning is the author of the fantasy novel Of Crowns and Legends. It's her first novel, but she had a disastrous first book signing. Only 2 people showed up. So she vented on social media, and that post went viral. Why did she do it in the first place?
I guess I just kind of wanted to get the feelings off my chest and maybe talk to some other authors about book signings. I don't really have a lot of writer friends I do have them in real life, but they're pretty far away. We're kind of scattered across the state or the country, and social media is how we connect. So I just kind of wanted to vent a little bit and kind of chat about it with other writer friends and kind of commiserate together.
And there's lots and lots of Stuph File news and, of course, an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you this was show number 0700 was Peter Anthony Holder, that guy who hosts and produced this show that feels like he's important enough to only do the opening slate every 100 shows. Talk about hubris.
Oh, come on. You've never been so angry at Peter that you thought about killing him.
Oh, Lord, every day. The Stuph File Program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. A walker out for a stroll in Wickham, Australia in early January came across what they thought was a dead body clothed in a tracksuit. Police cordoned off the area and began an investigation, but later concluded that the remains belonged to a cow. Roebourne Police Sergeant Dale Harmer voiced his frustration, saying, "It has caused police to use an entire day and 3 police officers guarding a scene for something which was never a human in the first place." Wow. Talk about hurting the cow's feelings. Talk about hitting a bovine when it's down. By the way, this is all fine and dandy, but does anybody question how big a tracksuit has to be to fit a cow? To help stop thefts, a Home Depot store in Linwood, Washington, hired a security guard. Naturally, the store also has security cameras, which allegedly caught the man as he piled up merchandise by the front door, telling employees he'd pay for them later. He instead took the items out to his car on 8 occasions, according to prosecutors. Police who were called to the store to look at the video recognized the man as a deputy from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. Investigators confronted 46-year-old Jeremy Zeller, who was moonlighting at the store when off duty. Zeller expressed confusion over being charged with organized retail theft, a felony, because he said he never had taken anything more than $750 worth of merchandise at one time, which would make the crimes misdemeanors. "Nope," said Detective Brad Riorda. When the thefts are part of a pattern, it becomes an organized crime, and all of the individual thefts are added together, and in this case, easily broke the $750 threshold. Which, by the way, you'd think Zeller would know if he was a good cop. Now he's just a jailed cop. Northern California has spent the last little while being battered by rain, and the atmospheric river battering that coastline has another weird consequence. The storms are making the Golden Gate Bridge eerily sing, and it sounds like this for miles around. How would you like this sound coming at you day and night? Nearby residents first noticed the phenomenon during summer storms in 2020 when they heard what some described as a screeching that sounded like torture. A Building and Operating Committee report from 2020 said the cause of the retrofit was 12,000 slats on the west side of the bridge. The cost to add clips that would stop the noise is $450,000. Officials said installation is due in the coming months. I gotta admit, it does sound like a drunken theremin player. I'm guessing that before it's gone, some film sound guy will record it just to use it in the soundtrack of a sci-fi film. Okay, enough with that noise. An employee at a business in Gainesville, Georgia, stepped outside at 1 a.m. on Christmas and was confronted by a robber with a gun demanding cash. The employee resisted, and another employee came outside to see what was going on, which spooked the robber, who fired a shot which hit no one but put him off balance, causing him to slip on the ice and fall flat on his face. His mugshot after arrest shows injuries and plenty of swelling in his face. And by the way, that mugshot in all its glory is on all of the Stuph File Program social media, so check it out. The victims and witnesses quickly disarmed the man and held him for police. It was like a scene from Home Alone, the investigating officer noted in his report. 30-year-old Luis Sijboko Ordonez was treated for his injuries and jailed for attempted robbery. Because of the Home Alone connection, I think we should honor Luis with the inaugural Joe Pesci Home Alone Award.
You found me with one more can, kid, and I'll snap up your cojones and boil them motor oil!
A French hospital was partially evacuated after a senior citizen arrived with a World War I artillery shell lodged in his rectum. I know, you have questions. Who doesn't? The 88-year-old patient visited Hôpital Saint-Meuse in Toulon to have the antique explosive removed, but instead sparked a bomb scare. This required the intervention of bomb disposal personnel, the evacuation of adult and pediatric emergencies, as well as the diversion of incoming emergencies. The World War I weaponry measured almost 8 inches in length and more than 2 inches in girth. Just picture that in your mind. Bomb disposal experts at the scene determined there was little possibility the shell would explode inside the man. Stunned doctors subsequently began the process of trying to remove the object from the man's rectum. It's believed the pervy patient inserted the item up his anus for sexual pleasure. Said one of the doctors, an apple, a mango, or even a can of shaving foam, we are used to finding unusual objects inserted where they shouldn't be, but a shell? Never. Wow. 88 years old and still getting freaky with World War I military objects. Do you get the feeling that somewhere in his youth he may have done this before? Or maybe he just wanted to go out with a bang. And finally, in this section of Stuph File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuph File Program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, police in Oklahoma put their cowboy skills to the test when a loose cow was spotted wandering outside an Olive Garden restaurant. The Stillwater Police Department said officers responded alongside Stillwater Animal Welfare when a loose cow was spotted near the Olive Garden in Stillwater. As the police humorously posted on their Facebook page, officers questioned the cow and learned that the cow had heard about the never-ending soup and salad option at Olive Garden and decided to see it for itself.
They give you all you want with their unlimited soup, salad, and breadsticks lunch. Warms me up just talking about it.
The cow was safely corralled and relocated from the area. The animal's origins were unclear. You know, unlike what the cops wrote on their Facebook page, perhaps there's another explanation. Perhaps one of the cow's relatives was being served up and it just wanted to pay its respects.
Olive Garden, when you're here, you're family.
Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuph File Program, shall we? Melisa Schonfield was a successful psychotherapist and a respected pillar of her community who had never been in trouble. But when her daughter's boyfriend began abusing her daughter and young grandson, Melisa decided to take matters into her own hands by hiring a hitman to dispose of the boyfriend. The hitman she attempted to hire turned out to be an undercover cop. After pleading guilty, Melisa spent more than 3 years in prison. She is now the author of the book, Bitter or Better, the Melisa Schonfield Story, and she joins us via Zoom from Hartwick, New York. Hi, Melisa.
Hi, how are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, I got to ask, how is your grandson and your daughter?
They are amazing. When I got out of prison, they had me living with them. And after 2 weeks living in my grandson's playroom, I decided to go house hunting, bought a house, and as things would have it, we all moved in together. So we are all thriving under the same roof.
Okay. I'm sure you had difficulty in writing the book because, and the reason why I bring that up is because we understand why you committed a crime, but you committed a crime.
Yes.
Did you have any trepidations about writing this book and sharing your story and getting the notoriety for having done this?
Well, actually, that's a two-parter. It didn't start out as a book. It was started out as a journal, and I wanted my family. I was terrified of dying in prison, that something was going to happen. So I wanted my family to have a report of what was going on. So I kept a daily journal and sent the journal home each day. Some days there were several letters that went home, but the book is just pieces of the journal. Otherwise, it would have looked like the Encyclopedia Britannica when I was done. So it's somewhat fragmented along with the legal documentation. So everything is kind of in there. As far as, what was the second part of the question?
Did you have any concerns and qualms about, kind of glorifying your story?
I never thought that it was going to turn into this. As far as I was concerned, nobody knew who I was. I was wrong about that. I felt that in keeping my family safe at the time, I was 57 years old. I'd had a great life, and I decided if it meant keeping my daughter and my grandson safe when the authorities wouldn't protect them, I was willing to do what I had to do.
Where is your grandson's father now? Is he in the picture?
No, he hasn't been in the picture since he was, I think, 2.5 years old. So he lives in Florida.
So the father lives in Florida and has
Yes.
no contact whatsoever with his son?
None whatsoever.
So let's go back to the beginning when you hatched this plan. Your daughter and your grandson were being terrorized by the dad.
Yes.
When did you decide to take matters into your own hands?
When there's 3 other children involved with another baby mother. And the 2 women, my daughter and this other woman, became very good friends. They were like sisters. And they would read his Facebook page because he never changed his password. And they learned that a woman from Peru was coming up into Miami, and he was going to marry her. And she wrote in there that she couldn't wait to raise all four of her children, especially the baby. So that was when my now ex-husband, who was my husband at the time, came into where I was reading and said to me, "This is what I just heard. This has to end. Who do you know?" And I took that to mean exactly what I did.
So how did you go about trying to hire a hitman?
I was sort of like the Keystone Cops. I don't think you've met a dumber criminal than myself. I had known somebody who was involved with a government agency, and I had helped them, and they said, "Anything you ever need, call me." I thought I couldn't come up with anyone I knew, and I did. I phoned him, and in the 10 minutes it took him to hang up the phone and text me, he had already called it into the police. They told him, "Pull her along, let's see how far she'll go." And I went too far.
So, first of all, do you have remorse on what you've done?
Yes. I am grateful that the man sitting with me in the car was not a hitman, that he was a police detective. I truly believe that if I would have had anything to do with ending this man's life, regardless of how horrible of a human being I thought he was, what he was doing to my family, I don't think I could have lived with myself. I do think I would have committed suicide prior to going to prison. I did contemplate it.
So you don't hold any grudge against the person who called the police?
No, I don't. I'm grateful in many ways.
Now that you've written this book, and again, you said your grandson's father is no longer in his life, but
Right.
you know where he is. Have you heard anything from him? And were you concerned that maybe putting your book out, you would put yourself in, shall I say, legal jeopardy?
No, I wasn't concerned at all because it's a bunch of facts. And granted, there is, my opinion, my thought process. The book itself isn't so much about the crime, even though the legal papers are there about that. It's about my process of going from being so angry and hypervigilant and trying to protect my family to getting to the end of it where I was a better person for spending all this time alone and starting to realize that the real prison I was in had nothing to do with geography.
When it comes to living inside a prison, the closest we ever get to inside of a women's prison is like watching Orange is the New Black. And the reason why I bring that show up is because it starred a person who did not come from, for lack of a better term, the criminal element or the poor side of town, who ended up in prison with a lot of people who, quite frankly, should be there.
Yes.
It sounds like your story was very similar to that situation. So from that perspective, how realistic is a show like Orange is the New Black as compared to what you lived for 3 years?
Well, actually, it was 3 years, 9 months, and 14 days. Okay. There's a lot of similarities. The characters, we can always find, there are people who really do fit the role of those characters. The dorm that she was living in is very similar to what you are in when you're in reception in Bedford Hills, which is where everyone goes in the beginning until they figure out where they are going to put you after being classified. As far as control and the whole concept of being in their custody, it's even more rigid than they would show you there. I believe there was one woman who got pregnant, I think, in the show with a CO. And unfortunately, that does happen. While I was in Taconic, there was one officer in particular who was walked off the compound for having a sexual relationship with another inmate. So it does happen. It can't be consensual on an inmate's part because we have no rights being in there. So it's being taken advantage of regardless of age.
Mm. Did you fear for your life while you were inside?
There were times I did. Bedford Hills, I was assaulted and I went to file the complaint of what happened. And another inmate who was an inmate liaison came up to me and said, "I'm ripping up your complaint because you have no idea what will happen to you subtly if you follow through with this." So I ripped it up. And the only thing that I did about the assault, I had to report it because I had physical issues from it. So you have to go to medical and you have to put down every bruise, every cut that you get. And I put that I hit myself. How did I phrase it? I hit the metal frame of the bed twice and the ladder once. And that's how I explained the missing teeth, the nose, and the forehead.
Hindsight's always 20/20.
Yes.
What would you do differently in the circumstances if you were in that situation where your daughter and your grandson were being terrorized by her boyfriend?
Well, there's two things I would do. In just looking back and being really brief about it, I had friends who lived outside of Toronto. I would have sent them up there. Now, granted, she wouldn't have been able to come back in the country for a while, but they would have been safe and they could have lived free up in Canada. The other thing, and this is having been out and having lots of time to think about it, I think the more publicity something gets, in a lot of ways, the safer you can be. And we kept it very hush-hush, the problems we were having and what was going on with my grandson's father. I don't think I would have done it that way. I think I would have made sure that the police did serve and protect, that the agencies that are available out there for people going through this kind of thing. I think I would have had a much louder voice, and I didn't. Instead, I just became somewhat self-righteous, somewhat entitled, and that was not the way to do it.
We're talking with Melisa Schonfield, the author of Bitter or Better, the Melisa Schonfield Story. We have more to talk about, but we need to take a quick break. So we'll come back in a bit here on the Stuph File Program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuph File Program. Stay tuned. The Stuph File Program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like, but the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/The Stuph File Program. Available on Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and just about every other way you stream audio. This is the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's radio that's everywhere you want to be, and some places you don't.
Still to come on the program, we'll talk to author Chelsea Banning, who wrote her first fantasy novel called Of Crowns and Legends, and had her first book signing where only 2 people showed up. But her story didn't end there. We'll also have an Idiot of the Day coming your way much later, and of course, more Stuph File news. But right now, let's get back to our conversation with Melisa Schonfield, who spent more than 3 years in prison after she pled guilty to trying to hire a hitman to bump off the abusive boyfriend of her daughter and the father of her grandson. She's also the author of Bitter or Better, the Melisa Schonfield Story. And Melisa, who did you write the book for? Whom do you want to read it? And what do you want them to take away from your story?
When you think that all hope is gone and this is your last recourse, it isn't. I think a lot of crimes that are committed are about your own process. It's not often about the other person. And what I came to realize was that I felt I had to protect my family, and that wasn't really the way it was. I think anybody who is dealing with a situation similar where you don't feel that the child is safe with one of the parents, I think you should read this and see that, you don't want to go down that road. You don't. There's other things you can do. And, take a step back. remember who you are at the core. And unfortunately, and fortunately, I mean, it was a curse and a blessing. I had a single room for by myself. I did not have bars on my door. It was just a metal door. And I had a lot of time to rediscover who I was, who I wanted to be, and the direction I wanted to go in.
How old is your grandson now?
He's 10.
How much of the story does he know? What do you tell him? What don't you want to tell him?
Well, unfortunately, we did try to protect him. He came to visit me once a month with his mother, and he honestly thought I was working at a school until we explained to him because he was 3. I went into prison on his 3rd birthday. We explained to him this is where adults go for timeouts. Adult timeouts can last years. He loved coming because he knew all the women, and he had an awesome playroom there. The last time he came was Mother's Day of 2019, and he cried when he had to say goodbye to everyone, and he knew he would not be back in that playroom. So that became his normal. He found out quite by accident some of the things. One day he had asked a question about his father, not realizing that the name of his father and the nickname we have for him were 2 different things. And he asked if that was the man that I tried to hurt. Or tried to hurt, and also I tried to keep him safe from. And we all said yes. And then my daughter had, on the DVR here at the house, had some of the shows that I was on prior to going to prison on TV, including the Dr. Oz interview. And doing what kids do, he was a lot more tech savvy than we realized, and he watched them. So we were forced to answer questions. He was very disturbed by watching it, but I think we did a really good job explaining that I did the wrong thing for the right reason. I kept him safe, but I didn't do it the right way.
As I mentioned in the introduction, you were a psychotherapist and a respected pillar of your community. Obviously, you believe therapy is very, very important. Knowing what your family has been through, and certainly what your grandson is understanding as he gets older, is therapy important for him?
Yes, therapy, open dialogue with everyone. No question is off limits. Obviously, you make the answers age appropriate. You only answer what they ask. I'm sure down the road he will need somebody else to speak to as well. And I can't say enough about being honest with your therapist, because my therapist at the time was shocked that I was arrested, had no idea what I was doing. I was not completely honest. And I don't think I was completely honest with anybody while I was going through this, because I was asked to perform a task that went against everything I believed in, but we didn't believe there was any other way to keep them safe.
Isn't that akin to the cobbler's children going without shoes? The fact that you as a therapist didn't speak to your therapist?
Definitely. Yes, most definitely. Yeah.
And speaking of the business you left behind, were you able to reintegrate yourself into society and work again, or is that all part of your past?
Well, unfortunately, I did surrender my license. It was not taken from me. And I could get it back. But what the state of New York wanted me to do was take a continuing education credit, which is, you have to take the whole class for every month that I missed being in prison. And my logic behind this was, one, it's very expensive to do. There are free classes, but for the most part, some of them you do have to pay for, and very time consuming. And also, I wasn't working. I didn't have a license. Why do I have to do this? I have a fair amount of medical issues that did stem from prior to prison, but were only they were compounded while I was incarcerated from the sub-therapeutic, subclinical medical that's offered while you're incarcerated. So I am retired / disabled. I'm not the most reliable worker. These days it depends on, weather and the kind of thing that I've done the day before. So if I've done a lot of sitting, I will pay the price the next day. So I am truly retired in that way. And I just I'm a big tinkerer, and a big doodler. I write, and I do a lot of drawing and some painting.
Have you had any post-prison conversations with the person who essentially turned you in?
No. And I wouldn't do that to him either. He did what he thought was right, and I'm glad that he did. But I don't think there's any reason to pursue that. That chapter of my life is over. I often look back and think I can't believe that I did what I did. It's surreal to me. From what I understand from a lot of the women who were in prison for some heinous things, they look at it the same way, that they can't believe they reached that new level of low where they did something so heinous, so violent. And fortunately for me, I couldn't do it. And the person who acted as my accomplice was a police officer. So thank God it didn't happen.
When you say that you haven't spoken to the person who turned you in,
yes.
but you feel grateful for the fact that he did, do you not anticipate that maybe by talking to him, you might alleviate any guilt he might feel in the situation? Or did you just send him a copy of the book?
I don't think he felt guilt at all. I believe at the time he was looking for to be reinstated by the government in a job. And this was his way of showing loyalty. So there's really no reason to speak with him. He did the right thing for the right reason. I wish he would have called me back and said, "What are you doing here? I can't help you. And would you step back and take a look at what you're asking me to do?" And he didn't do that. That's the only thing I regret.
When I mentioned the fact that you spent more than 3 years in prison, you brought it down to the moment, to the day of how much time you spent inside.
1,385 days.
Wow. What was your sentence initially? Did you serve
5
all
years.
of it? Okay, so you had 5 years, and what, you got off with good behavior? Is that why you were out earlier?
Well, you get, I always forget the ratio, but I think it's for every 6 days you serve, you get one off. I want to say that's what it is. I might be wrong in the calculation. And then if you work either 2 years as an inmate program assistant or take 24 college credits, you get another 6 months off. Because I have a master's degree, they would not let me take any college credits. So I was working as a pre-high school GED teacher's aide. And I did that. I think I was out on medical leave more than I actually was in the classroom, but I did do that. So in my spare time, I would also help the Spanish-speaking inmates learn enough English that they could do the writing part of the GED. And I actually learned the easy way to do algebra while I was in prison. And then I also taught knitting. I would help people sew. So it was really it was communal living as much as you wanted it to be. And you learned who you could somewhat trust, who you really could trust, and who to stay away from.
How much of this experience that you've been through, how much of it has affected personal relationships? And by that, I mean, you made a lot of news by what you did, and you went to jail.
Yes.
Do old friends stand by you? When you get out of jail, do you have new friends that you may have made in jail? What's your friendship relationships kind of like these days?
Well, when you have to understand, I moved 2.5 hours away from where I was up north. So I'm now in central New York. I followed my daughter down here for a job that she got. I did not want to remain up there. It actually had nothing to do with the crime. It was more about my ex-husband. I found that with the exception of one very close friend who unfortunately listened to someone else and not to what I was saying, an aunt who I probably would not have had much to do with any longer, and her daughter. Everybody else rallied, supported me. They wrote me, they visited, they sent me whatever they thought it was I needed, or if I asked for something. When I got out, the phone calls I couldn't handle because all of a sudden everybody could call me. In prison, you can only call someone who's on your list. So it was being bombarded by all of this support, which was wonderful, but it was nice to know what was there. The problem I had, and I think this is the big issue of being institutionalized, by spending so much time alone, I could not deal with the big social scene. So COVID happened less than a year when I was out. And while everyone's complaining about, being confined, I'm thinking, guys, this is nothing. I mean, I can walk around here. I can put a mask on and, go outside. I've got this huge yard that I can go into. So it was, that part of me changed to being a very social creature. I prefer, one or two people and dealing with it that way instead of the big social events that, I used to cook for, the parties we would have. That doesn't interest me anymore.
Did you make any friends in prison?
Yes, I did. And believe it or not, they were of very good caliber people who also made a mistake. I have one that lives out of state who was, she's 2 years older than my daughter, and we became very, very close. And periodically, there would be people who would come through with similar backgrounds, not necessarily education, but with the same kind of supports and clearly knowing the difference of right and wrong, but becoming desperate. There were some women who did some really heinous murders that even them, you start to realize I wear the same shade of green they do. There's no differential that if your crime wasn't, someone that you murdered, you wear a lighter shade green. It doesn't work that way. So you start to learn more about the character of people, and you watch what they do and how they treat other people. And then you determine if it's somebody you would actually, like to sit down and break bread with or even have a conversation.
Are you allowed to maintain those relationships, or is it because you're a parolee that you can't mingle with others who are incarcerated themselves?
I am not a parolee. I've been off of parole since last spring. When I first got out, you were not allowed any contact, even via phone or email, with anyone who was on parole or still incarcerated. The law changed, I want to say, less than a year later. And as long as you weren't doing anything illegal, nor the person you were in contact with, you were allowed to do that. One of the women who I was close with, I actually bunked with her when I first went to Taconic. She has died of breast cancer. Recently, and I did a TikTok on this, Gigi Jordan had just committed suicide. And having spent a little bit of time with her in Bedford Hills, it affects you in a very precarious way, in that I understand the desperation. I understand not wanting to have to go back to prison, and also to be out and, her son's not with her. So there's a lot of different circumstances, but we all, I think, go through different phases of those same feelings, because we have changed, having been incarcerated, having been controlled, and being in the custody of people who really don't care, but you're in their custody. It's a very, it changes the basic nature, I think, of what a human being is.
Talking about relationships, one last question, and that is, you mentioned that you were discussing this situation when you were looking to hire a hit person, when you were looking to help your daughter. You were talking to your then husband.
Yes.
Who is no longer your husband.
No.
Has any of this situation that you've been through, is that what led to the relationship dying, or was there other problems in the relationship? And you don't have to go into those if you don't want to.
No, we did. We had a lot of issues prior to that. There was a lot of extracurricular activity on his part. And I had just started withdrawing, where I would cram my entire work week into 3 days so that I could have a day or two just to drop a pin on the map and see where I'm going to drive for the day. I slowly became a shell of who I was. I stopped sleeping well at night. That did not help anything. And after you've had empty nest, and then you have a grown child who's still your child, but they're an adult, and a newborn baby, because he came home to us how old was he? He was 3 months old when he came home. You're going backwards, not forward, and yet you have all this other nonsense that's going on. So me going to prison just made it more convenient for him to get a divorce because I had no power in which to argue, to fight, to do any of that. I didn't even have my own lawyer. And that's not the prison's fault. That was my stupidity because I believed my ex telling me I didn't need a lawyer.
The book is Bitter or Better. Would you like to see this turn into a film?
I would love for that to happen. I think it would help a lot of people. And the story really is kind of interesting because you have all of your emotions are in it. You do have humor. There is hurt. There is anger. And there's compassion. Everything is in it. And I think the right screenwriter could turn it into something that a lot of people would appreciate and walk away saying, I like that movie. It helped.
Melisa, thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me.
Melisa Schonfield, author of Bitter or Better, The Melisa Schonfield Story. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0700, and you'll find links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca where you can order her book directly. You're listening to the Stuph File Program with me, Peter Anthony Holden.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuph File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuph File Program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuph File Program.
You're listening to the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's radio that's now gluten-free.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to Chelsea Banning, the author of Crowns and Legends, who had a very interesting initial book signing segment. Plus, we do indeed have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on, and we have one more Stuph File news story to share with you before we get to our final guest on the show. Police in Philadelphia's Ogance section were chasing a car when its driver lost control and crashed into a mobile phone store across the street from the 35th District Police headquarters. Said a neighbor, "It sounded like a train had hit a car. It shook my house." This happened at around 11 p.m. and the driver managed to jump out and run, but officers chased the unnamed man down and arrested him. Charges were not specified, but officers noted the man had a gun. Meanwhile, the next night, a driver who was not being chased in Philadelphia's Ogance section managed to hit a parked police car and careen into, guess what? The 35th District Police headquarters. It was 1 a.m., and the 25-year-old man was uninjured and not arrested. Well, it would seem that the 35th District Police headquarters is a magnet for mayhem. I hope they have insurance.
Get Allstate and be better protected from mayhem, like me.
And let's get to our final guest here in this edition of the Stuph File Program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. Chelsea Banning is a self-described lover of fantasy and the author of her debut novel, Of Crowns and Legends. Every first-time author gets excited about the release of their book and doing their first book signing. But Chelsea's first book signing didn't go so well. Only 2 people showed up. But there is a silver lining in that somewhat dark cloud, and Chelsea is here right now to talk about it. She joins us via Zoom from Ohio. Hi, Chelsea.
Hi, how are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. So, you had this book signing, and no one showed up. Or 2 people showed up.
Yeah, two of my friends showed up out of, I think, 37, had said they were going to try to come. And My friends do usually show up. So one of the reasons why I was like, well, what happened is because my friends usually do show up. If they say they're going to do something, they'll be there. And I learned later that it was just like the perfect storm of weather and sinus infections and the flu and everything. So.
But it didn't end, the story didn't end there. You went on social media, and despite the fact that you were all bummed out about it, you were willing to share your despair on social media, and I guess to a certain degree, a little bit of your embarrassment on social media. What made you reach out on social media in the first place?
I guess I just kind of wanted to get the feelings off my chest and maybe talk to some other authors about book signings. I don't really have a lot of writer friends like I do have them in real life, but they're pretty far away. We're kind of scattered across the state or the country, and social media is how we connect. So I just kind of wanted to vent a little bit and kind of chat about it with other writer friends and, kind of commiserate together, I guess.
Okay, so you were reaching out to writer friends.
Yeah.
But it's gone beyond that. You received some responses from people I'm assuming you didn't anticipate you would hear from.
Absolutely not. I did not expect it to go anywhere. I expected maybe a couple of my friends that I was connected to on Twitter to see it or to not see it at all because it was a Saturday, I believe. It was a Sunday. So I didn't really expect anyone to really see it. So I was not expecting anything at all.
So you were getting this off your chest, just as a few friends. But as I mentioned, some people did see it. Who did you hear from first, as far as celebrity writers are concerned?
I think the first name I saw, I can't remember if it was Jodi Picoult or Robin Hobb. Those were the two names I saw first. And then I kept scrolling and kept seeing all of these names, and it was just amazing. And the name that really blew it up was Henry Winkler, because he got it outside of the writing community.
Because I was about to ask, it takes one celebrity out there to blow this up even bigger with their other celebrity friends who read whatever they write on social media. So you say Henry Winkler was the one?
I think so. I think that's kind of what got other people, because people like Sean Cassidy even replied, and Flavor Flav, and not just there were big names in the writing community, but it's hard for, that to kind of expand outward to other communities. So to have Henry Winkler retweet what I said and link my book got the attention of outside the writing community and more into bigger online communities.
Now, speaking of the writer community, you had people like Margaret Atwood, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman. You mentioned Robin Hobb. The list goes on and on. You must be in awe of the people who are literary giants who are hearing your story and commiserating with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely in awe and in shock. I mean, other names were Min Jin Lee and Rebecca Mackay. Bridget Kemmerer and Joanne Harris have been wonderful. They've offered to help with some advice. They're both very sweet. And everyone has just been so kind and helpful. And, Stephen King and Neil Gaiman really live up to their reputations because they both tweeted about my next book signing and their words of encouragement. And it's just so nice that now everyone else can see how encouraging and supportive the writing community is.
And you did have a second book signing. That was, I assume, a lot different than your first one.
Yes, it was. It was at the library where I work, and we had about 50 people come and 2 local news stations. So it was a lot of fun and a very surreal experience.
I've seen a story on social media. I even saw you on our local newscast here in Montreal. You were talking to one of the anchors during the noon hour newscast here in Montreal. So you're getting a lot of response. Are you surprised by how that response has literally blown up beyond where you are in Ohio?
Not anymore. After some time to reflect on it, I have kind of realized, especially since the pandemic happened, people really like to see situations like this where people are vulnerable on the internet and they, take away those filters. It's just been so crazy the last few years. So to see a wholesome story that's a unique story, because we see stories about people saving dogs or, Instacart shoppers helping a customer because they saw that they had fallen or something. And those are wonderful, obviously those are wonderful stories, but this was kind of a unique situation that was wholesome and encouraging, and just to see people come together to be supportive of each other and to kind of see something real on the internet that's not hidden behind, filters or highlight reels.
It must be very rewarding to hear some of the, and let's be honest, some of the early failures that some big-time writers have had. I mean, I've been reading through some of the responses that are just absolutely delightful. Stephen King writes, "At my first Salem's Lot signing, I had one customer, a fat kid, who said, 'Hey, bud, do you know where there's some Nazi books?'" And Margaret Atwood wrote, joined the club, I did a signing in which nobody came except a guy who wanted to buy some Scotch tape and thought I was the help."
Yeah, and I think with Stephen King's Salem Lot, he was already an established writer too at that point, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, to see even Stephen King being established already and not having someone come to a signing, I think was really encouraging. I've gotten a lot of aspiring writers or new writers, new authors saying how much inspiration they found because of this. And that's amazing. That is my favorite part of all of this.
Well, we've got just a few minutes left, and I would be remiss if I didn't actually talk about your book. So your book is called Of Crowns and Legends, and I understand that this is not just a one-off. You had planned this book as part of a trilogy.
Correct. This is book 1 of 3, and it is a King Arthur reimagining that takes place 20 years after Arthur's death, and it follows the children that he and Guinevere had that were never supposed to exist.
That's, again, as I mentioned in the introduction, that you are a fantasy fan. That is a very vivid imagination to come up with children to a king that no one knew had.
Yeah, I don't even remember how I got the story spark. It started in high school, just kind of reading and thinking and just letting my brain go.
So from having that book signing where only 2 people showed up to the mass appeal that you've had online because of your situation, how many books have you sold?
Almost 9,000 copies altogether.
That's fantastic.
I know. I look at that number and I can't believe it's real. I'm like, shouldn't there be a little less zeros?
Have you heard back from any of the people who initially responded to what you posted, some of the authors who have now actually read your book?
I've gotten some really great reviews and feedback from my book. None of the big time, I haven't heard anything from the big time authors, but I have heard from a lot of readers who have really liked my book, saying they stayed up all night reading it. They couldn't put it down and they fell in love with the characters. And that's the dream for any author.
What was the roller coaster you went through between the time that you only had 2 people and you left that particular book signing till the time when you started getting responses like the ones we've just been talking about?
Oh boy, it was probably a couple of weeks. A lot of people, I've had a lot of digital sales, so those came in pretty quick, the reviews. And just this past week is when I've really started to get a lot more reviews and people tagging me on social media saying how much they love the book. And that's the best. That's just the dream that every writer has, is when somebody falls in love with your work.
You work at a library. Is your book available on the shelves of the library you work at?
It is. It is available at my library. We have actually a few copies now, and it's also, we're part of what's called the CleveNet system that connects a few different libraries where we can send books back and forth, and there's quite a few copies rolling around the CleveNet system in Northeast Ohio, which is absolutely crazy and wonderful and so surreal.
Well, congratulations on the book. I will mention the title again, Of Crowns and Legends. It's also available, I would assume, on Amazon, correct?
Yes, it's available on Amazon, bookshop.org, ebooks pretty much everywhere, Barnes & Noble online, Target, Walmart, basically almost anywhere.
And as I mentioned, it's the first of 3, so when do you anticipate you'll release the other 2?
I'm hoping book 2 comes out late this year. That's my goal. And book 3, hopefully late next year.
Congratulations, Chelsea, on all that's taken place. I'm sure it's very, very well deserved, and upward and onward when it comes to your writing career.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Chelsea Banning, author of her debut novel of Crowns and Legends. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0700, and you'll find links to Chelsea's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order her book directly. You're listening to the Stuph File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the Strange Things Adults Do. The Stuph File presents the Idiot of the Day.
We're almost getting close to the point where we might have to ban this type of story from the Idiot of the Day because it's happening too regularly, but here we go again. 19-year-old Joshua Reed had a Broward County Court's pretrial release GPS ankle-worn bracelet when he was part of a crew's crime spree. Reed was out on bond for grand theft auto in Broward County and has a pending case in Palm Beach County, said Sergeant Fernando Bosch of the South Miami Police Department. We were able to track this guy who is responsible for 14 cases. Detectives questioned Reed at the North Miami Police Department, and he denied it all. In South Miami, surveillance video recorded on January 7th shows the crew outside of a home near Dante Facel Park. One thief used a rock and a boulder to try to break a hurricane impact-resistant glass door. As a family slept inside, detectives said the thieves found a parked Mercedes-Benz with a key fob inside, and they were trying to get to the keys of a parked Bentley. Their modus operandi is to wear dark-colored clothing and break into homes in search of key fobs for luxury cars. Detectives are searching for Reed's accomplices. Reed is facing 4 counts of burglary of an occupied dwelling, 4 counts of burglary of an unoccupied structure, 2 counts of first-degree grand theft, 2 counts of second-degree grand theft, third-degree grand theft of a vehicle, armed grand theft of a vehicle, and criminal mischief. Wow. Why, oh why, would you not only commit 14 crimes while wearing an ankle monitor, but brazenly deny it all, again, while still wearing a GPS ankle monitor? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuph File program, number 0700. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links in all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuph File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0700. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter as PA Holder, and don't forget to check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, TrueTalkRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, MediaCore in Singapore, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuph File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. We leave you with this deep environmental thought. If we don't do something about global warming soon, eventually there won't be any ice floes left to put our elders on.